Part 1. The Echo in the Empty Crib. It started, as most nightmares do, subtly. Not with a bang or a scream, but with a whisper so faint I almost dismissed it as the creaking of old pipes in our century-old New England home. My name is Edward Hayes, and I'm a man who's always prided himself on his pragmatism, his grounded nature. Ghosts, black magic, those were things confined to late-night movies and campfire tales. Certainly not the reality of a busy structural engineer with a mortgage and 2 mischievous golden retrievers. But what happened to my sister, Sarah, and the chilling events that followed ripped my world apart and forced me to confront a darkness I never knew existed. Sarah, my younger sister by 3 years, was the light of our family, always had been. Where I was quiet and reserved, she was a vibrant splash of color, an artist with a laugh that could fill a room and a heart big enough to encompass every stray animal she ever encountered. She had married David, a kind, unassuming history teacher, 2 years prior, and their joy had become complete when they announced her pregnancy. A baby. Our family, already close-knit, was buzzing with anticipation. My parents, Eleanor and Richard, were practically giddy at the thought of becoming grandparents. And I was looking forward to being the cool uncle, ready with terrible jokes and boundless energy for playtime. Sarah and David lived in a charming, albeit slightly run-down, Victorian house just outside of Salem, Massachusetts. They'd bought it for a steal, lured by its historic charm and spacious yard. I remember teasing them about the potential for resident spirits, given Salem's history, but Sarah would just laugh it off, saying any ghosts would be friendly ones, happy to share their home. Little did we know how chillingly prophetic those words would become. The pregnancy was smooth, uneventful. Sarah glowed. She'd send us ultrasound pictures, little grainy glimpses of the life growing inside her, and we'd coo over them like proud parents ourselves. The nursery was painted a soft, calming green, filled with lovingly chosen furniture, handmade quilts, and a crib that stood ready, waiting. That crib, it would come to symbolize so much. The first oddity, something that felt less like an omen and more like a curious anomaly, occurred about 2 months before Sarah's due date. She called me, her voice a little shaky, not her usual buoyant tone. "Eddie, I had just heard something really strange." I asked her what she meant. She explained that she'd been in the nursery, folding baby clothes, when she distinctly heard a baby crying. Not a faint cry, but a clear, distressed wail coming from the empty crib. She said it lasted only a second, then vanished as quickly as it appeared. David was at work, and she was alone in the house. I tried to rationalize it. Old house, Sarah. Pipes clanking, maybe a cat outside that sounded like a baby. Who knows? I was trying to be the sensible older brother, but even as I spoke, a prickle of unease started at the back of my neck. Sarah was not one to imagine things. She was practical, grounded, much like me. She conceded, but I could tell she wasn't entirely convinced. "Maybe," she said, her voice still a little breathless, It sounded so real, Eddie, so close." A week later, the calls became more frequent. Sarah started complaining of cold spots in the house, particularly around the nursery. She'd wake up in the middle of the night, convinced she heard footsteps on the second floor when David was sound asleep beside her. Then came the whispers. She described them as indistinct murmurs, like a conversation happening just out of earshot, always seeming to emanate from the nursery. David, however, heard nothing. He put it down to pregnancy hormones, to her heightened senses, and while he was loving and supportive, I could tell he was starting to get a little exasperated. I visited them that weekend. The house, despite its age, usually had a warm, inviting atmosphere. This time there was an underlying chill, a sense of quiet foreboding that settled over me the moment I stepped inside. It wasn't just the cool New England air. It felt deeper, colder. I tried to dismiss it. Maybe it was just Sarah's anxiety rubbing off on me. When I entered the nursery, a strange wave of dizziness washed over me. The air was noticeably colder in there, even with the heating on full blast. I ran my hand over the tiny wooden slats of the crib. It felt like ice. I told her she was probably just the draft from the old windows, but she just looked at me with wide, troubled eyes. "It's not just the draft, Eddie. It's different." That night, something inexplicable happened. I was sleeping on their pull-out couch in the living room. Around 3 a.m., I was jolted awake by what sounded like furniture scraping across a wooden floor. It was coming from the nursery. I sat bolt upright, my heart hammering against my ribs. I heard it again, a distinct, heavy drag, followed by a soft thud. It sounded like the crib was being moved. I crept upstairs, my flashlight from my phone illuminating the dim hallway. The nursery door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open slowly, my breath catching in my throat. The room was bathed in moonlight, casting long, eerie shadows. And there, in the center of the room, was the crib. It had been moved. Not just shifted a few inches, but dragged across the room, now sitting at an odd angle facing the window. A wave of cold dread washed over me. I distinctly remembered Sarah and David placing it against the far wall. There was no way it could have moved on its own. And Sarah and David were still asleep, their bedroom door closed. I checked on them just to be sure. They were both deeply asleep, oblivious. The next morning, I confronted them about it. David was baffled. He swore he hadn't touched the crib, and Sarah, though she looked pale and shaken, insisted she hadn't either. "See, Eddie," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Something is happening here. Something not right." That was the first undeniable proof for me that something genuinely strange was going on. It wasn't just Sarah's imagination or old house quirks. Something was physically manipulating objects in their home. The rational explanations I had clung to were starting to fray at the edges, replaced by a growing, terrifying suspicion that something unseen was watching, waiting, and had just made its presence known.
Part 2. The Shadow in the Mirror. After that weekend, a sense of dread settled in. It wasn't just Sarah's anxiety anymore. It was mine, too. I found myself checking in on her constantly, calls and texts increasing in frequency. David, bless his pragmatic heart, was still trying to find logical explanations for everything. He suggested they get the house inspected for structural shifts, for drafts, for anything that could explain the bizarre occurrences. But deep down, I knew it wasn't a draft that moved a heavy wooden crib. The next few weeks were a slow, agonizing descent into something darker. The cold spots in the nursery intensified. Sarah started complaining of feeling watched, a persistent sense of an unseen presence in the house. She'd be in the living room, reading a book, and swear she saw a flicker of movement in the hallway, or a shadow pass by the periphery of her vision. David, despite his efforts to remain skeptical, was beginning to look worn down, his usual easygoing demeanor replaced by a furrowed brow and tired eyes. Then came the physical manifestations, more unsettling than anything before. One evening, Sarah was in the kitchen preparing dinner when a small framed photograph on the mantelpiece in the living room suddenly flew off, shattering against the stone hearth. It was a wedding photo of her and David, a cherished memory. There was no open window, no tremor, no logical reason for it to have fallen. Sarah screamed, and David rushed in, finding her trembling, staring at the shattered glass. He tried to reassure her, saying it must have been precariously balanced, but the look in his eyes betrayed his growing unease. The whispers in the nursery intensified, becoming more distinct, though still audible. She swore she could hear a low, guttural humming, like a mournful lullaby, coming from the empty room late at night. She started sleeping with a light on, something she hadn't done since she was a child. Her vibrant spirit was beginning to dim, replaced by a constant pallor and a haunted look in her eyes. The joy of her pregnancy, which should have been radiating from her, was slowly being eclipsed by fear. My parents, Eleanor and Richard, lived a few hours away in upstate New York. I tried to shield them from the worst of it, downplaying the events when I spoke to them. My mother, Eleanor, is a worrier by nature, and I knew the full truth would send her into a panic. My father, Richard, a retired history professor, was a man of reason, but even he had a quiet respect for things unexplained, a result of his years spent delving into forgotten lore and historical oddities. One afternoon, Sarah called me, her voice ragged with fear. "Eddie," she choked out, "it's getting worse, much worse." She told me about her reflection. She'd been in the bathroom brushing her hair when she noticed something strange in the mirror. Behind her, a shadowy figure seemed to coalesce in the reflection, standing just where the nursery door was located. It wasn't fully formed, more like a distortion in the light, a ripple in reality, but it was distinctly humanoid. It was tall and slender, and Sarah said she felt an immediate icy cold wash over her, a feeling of malevolent presence. She spun around, but there was nothing there in the physical space, only the empty hallway. But when she looked back at the mirror, the shadow was still there, observing her. It lingered for a terrifying few seconds, then dissipated like smoke. Sarah dropped her brush, her heart pounding. She ran out of the bathroom, locking herself in the bedroom until David came home. This was no longer just bumps in the night. This was a direct, terrifying communication from something unseen. It was showing itself, however partially, and it was showing itself to Sarah. Why her? Why now? The questions gnawed at me. I drove down to Salem the very next day. I couldn't stand being so far away, feeling helpless. When I saw Sarah, I was shocked. She had lost weight, and the dark circles under her eyes were prominent. She looked like a ghost herself. David greeted me, his face etched with exhaustion. "I don't know what to do, Eddie," he admitted, his voice cracking. "She's terrified to be alone, and I can't be here every minute." That night, I experienced it for myself in a way that solidified my belief and plunged me into the terrifying reality of their situation. I was determined to stay awake, to stand guard. I sat in the living room, a mug of cold coffee beside me, my senses on high alert. The house was silent, save for the hum of the refrigerator. Around 2 a.m., a distinct sound drifted from the nursery. It was the same mournful lullaby Sarah described, a low, guttural, non-human sound, chilling to the bone. It resonated in the quiet house, filling the space with a palpable sense of sorrow and malice. I felt the familiar cold spot creep over me, starting from my feet and crawling up my spine. I stood up, my muscles tense, and slowly made my way towards the nursery. As I neared the door, the temperature dropped further, a stark, unnatural cold that made my breath visible. I pushed the door open, my hand shaking. The room was dark, but a faint, eerie light seemed to emanate from the crib itself, casting a spectral glow. And then I saw it, or rather I felt it, a disturbance in the air, a shimmering distortion directly above the empty crib. It wasn't a distinct form, not like Sarah's reflection, but it was there, a pulsing, malevolent presence. The lullaby swelled, growing louder, more insistent, and then a chilling whisper slithered through the air right into my ear. It was a single word, distorted and ancient, but undeniably clear. Mine. My blood ran cold. The word hung in the air, echoing in my mind. It was possessive, sinister, and filled with an ancient hunger. I stumbled backward, slamming the nursery door shut, my heart hammering against my ribs. I leaned against the wall, gasping for air, the cold still clinging to me. This was no ghost simply haunting a house. This was something focused, something with an agenda, and that agenda, I realized with a sickening lurch, seemed to be centered on Sarah's unborn child. The terror I had for Sarah was now compounded by a desperate need to understand what this entity was, and more importantly, how to stop it.
Part 3. The Doctor's Doubt and the Crone's Warning.
The morning after my terrifying encounter in the nursery, I sat Sarah and David down. I recounted everything: the mournful lullaby, the frigid air, and the chilling whisper of mine. David, usually so composed, looked utterly shell-shocked. Sarah, however, didn't seem surprised, only profoundly grim. It was as if my experience simply confirmed her worst fears. "We need to do something," I urged, my voice tight with a desperation I rarely showed. "This isn't just an old house acting up. This is malicious, and it's after the baby." David, still reeling, suggested the most logical step he could think of. "We need to get Sarah to a doctor, Eddie. All this stress, it can't be good for her or the baby." While I agreed about the stress, I knew in my gut this wasn't just about Sarah's mental state. But a medical checkup was necessary regardless. We drove Sarah to her obstetrician, Dr. Eris. She was a kind, no-nonsense woman with a calming presence. Sarah, usually open, hesitated to recount the paranormal events, understandably fearing she'd be dismissed as delusional. So I did most of the talking, focusing on her extreme anxiety, the sleepless nights, and the unexplained physical fatigue she was experiencing. I omitted the specifics of the haunting, painting a picture of overwhelming stress, though the haunted look in Sarah's eyes probably spoke volumes anyway. Dr. Eris listened patiently, her expression concerned. She conducted a thorough examination, her brow furrowing slightly as she checked Sarah's blood pressure, which was elevated. "Sarah, your stress levels are through the roof," she stated gently, her gaze warm but firm. "This isn't healthy for you or the baby. I'm going to recommend some bed rest and stress management techniques. We need to monitor this very closely." She prescribed a mild sedative to help with sleep and recommended she take a break from her work as an art teacher. When we left the clinic, Sarah looked disheartened. "She thinks I'm just stressed, Eddie," she murmured, a tear tracing a path down her cheek. "She doesn't believe me about the house." "It's okay, Sarah," I said, putting an arm around her. "We'll handle this, one step at a time. The main thing is to keep you and the baby safe." Back at their house, David tried to create a calmer environment. He put on soothing music, lit lavender candles, and encouraged Sarah to relax. But the insidious presence in the house wasn't deterred by scented wax. The cold spots intensified, making certain areas of the house unbearable. Objects would occasionally move, a vase would shift on a table, a door would creak open or close when no one was near. The whispers persisted, a constant, low thrum beneath the surface of their lives. Then came the dreams. Sarah started having vivid, terrifying nightmares. She described them as fragmented, unsettling visions. She saw herself trapped in a dark, suffocating space, a baby crying in the distance, getting fainter and fainter. Sometimes she saw a gnarled, skeletal hand reaching out, its long fingers tipped with black, trying to grasp at something precious. She'd wake up screaming, drenched in sweat, her heart pounding. My parents, hearing about Sarah's declining health and the general unease, decided to come down from upstate New York. My mother, Eleanor, is a petite woman with kind eyes, but a fierce determination when it comes to her children. My father, Richard, with his scholarly air and quiet demeanor, was initially skeptical of anything truly paranormal, but he trusted my judgment. Their arrival was a comfort, a much-needed injection of normalcy, but even they couldn't ignore the oppressive atmosphere clinging to the house. One evening, my mother was tidying up in the living room while Sarah rested. She paused by the mantelpiece where the wedding photo had shattered. "You know," she said quietly, more to herself than to me, "this reminds me of something." I looked at her, intrigued. My mother had a surprising reservoir of old folklore and superstitions, passed down from her grandmother Rose. "What is it, Mom?" I asked. "My grandmother, your great-grandmother Rose, she always used to say that when objects move on their own, especially cherished ones, it's a sign of a very angry spirit, not just residual energy, but something that means harm. And the cold, that's often a sign of a drain on life force." Her voice was soft, but the words sent a shiver down my spine. a drain on life force. Sarah's pallor, her fatigue. My father, typically the voice of reason, surprisingly chimed in. I've read about similar accounts in historical texts, Eddie. While often dismissed as hysteria or delusion, there are consistent themes across cultures. Unexplained phenomenon escalating, particularly around vulnerable individuals, or, in some cases, new life. He looked around the room, his eyes lingering on the closed nursery door. It sounds like you have a very strong entity here. Their acceptance, their quiet validation, was a strange relief. It meant I wasn't alone in my escalating fear. The turning point came when Sarah, desperate for answers beyond what conventional medicine could offer, stumbled upon an old woman in a small, dusty antique shop in downtown Salem. Sarah, trying to take her mind off things, had gone for a walk. The shop was filled with oddities, and as she browsed, an elderly woman with sharp, knowing eyes and a weathered face emerged from the back. She was selling trinkets and potions, a self-proclaimed spiritual advisor. Sarah, initially skeptical, felt drawn to her. "Lost something, dearie?" the old woman rasped, her voice like dry leaves rustling. Not a question, but a statement. Sarah, startled, just shook her head. The crone's eyes, piercing and dark, fixed on Sarah's pregnant belly. A long, thin finger, adorned with tarnished silver rings, slowly lifted and pointed. "No, not lost, not yet, but something seeks to take what is due. A payment demanded, a life for a life." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the antique shop's draft. "What do you mean?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. The crone leaned in conspiratorially, her breath smelling faintly of herbs and dust. "The dark arts, child. They leave scars. Sometimes they leave debts. And when a debt is unpaid, it claims its due from the innocent. A child, especially one so full of light, is a powerful offering." Sarah stumbled back, her face draining of color. "Black magic?" The crone nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving Sarah's face. "The signs are clear. The cold, the shadows, the dreams of darkness, and the hunger. The hunger is strong. You carry a beacon, dearie, a beacon that attracts a darkest of shadows." She pressed a small, intricately carved wooden charm into Sarah's hand. "Wear this. It won't stop what's coming, but it will offer a moment's reprieve. Seek answers, child, before the shadow reaps its harvest." Sarah fled the shop, the crone's words echoing in her ears like a death knell. She burst through the front door of their house, pale and trembling, the wooden charm clutched tightly in her hand. "Black magic, Eddie," she cried, her voice rising to a frantic pitch. "She said it's black magic. They want my baby." My blood ran cold. Black magic, the words felt ancient and terrifying, far beyond any scope of ghost story I had ever heard. This explained the malevolent intent, the focused hunger, the unnaturalness of it all. This wasn't just a haunting, it was a curse. And the chilling implication of a payment demanded, a life for a life, sent a fresh wave of terror through me, a premonition of the unspeakable loss that was rapidly approaching.
Part 4. The Miscarriage and the Seed of Revenge. The old woman's words, black magic, and a life for a life, had struck a terrifying chord. My mind, usually so logical, scrambled to process this ancient, sinister concept. It wasn't just the ghost now. It was something far more deliberate, far more insidious. Sarah was in hysterics, and David, though still struggling to accept the supernatural, couldn't deny the profound impact this was having on his wife. "We have to leave this house, Sarah," David pleaded, his voice cracking with desperation. "We'll go to your parents or a hotel, anywhere. Just get out of here." But Sarah, in her fear, clung to a desperate hope. "What if it follows us? What if leaving just makes it angrier?" The crone's words about a payment demanded echoed in her mind, a chilling premonition that this wasn't tied to the house, but to them. My parents, Eleanor and Richard, were quiet, their faces etched with deep worry. My mother, usually so calm, kept touching Sarah's arm, offering silent comfort. My father, the historian, looked lost in thought, as if sifting through centuries of forgotten lore, trying to find an answer. We spent the next few days in a heightened state of alert. Sarah refused to be alone, even for a moment. We took turns sitting with her, trying to project a sense of normalcy, but the unspoken dread hung heavy in the air. The cold spots intensified, making even breathing feel like inhaling ice. The whispers were no longer just in the nursery. They seemed to follow Sarah, a constant faint hiss just at the edge of hearing. Then the dreams intensified. Sarah would thrash in her sleep, crying out for her baby, and David would wake her, holding her until her tremors subsided. She described seeing a woman, indistinct and shrouded, standing over her, her face obscured by shadow, but her eyes burning with a dark, chilling light. This woman was always reaching, her long skeletal fingers clawing at Sarah's stomach. On one particularly harrowing night, about a month before Sarah's due date, the attacks escalated to a physical level. I was in the living room trying to read, but my eyes kept darting towards the nursery door. Suddenly, a piercing scream tore through the silence. It was Sarah. I leapt up, my heart seizing in my chest, and raced upstairs. David was already there, bursting into their bedroom. Sarah was on the floor, curled into a fetal position, clutching her swollen belly, her face contorted in agony. Her eyes were wide open with terror, fixed on something I couldn't see. "She touched me, Eddie," she wailed, tears streaming down her face. "She pushed me. It tried to pull the baby out." David quickly scooped her up, his face pale with horror. There was a dark purplish bruise forming on her arm, as if she'd been violently grabbed. The air in the room was frigid, and I felt a faint pressure, like an unseen hand pushing against my chest. We rushed her to the emergency room. Dr. Aronis was on call, and her calm demeanor was a small comfort amidst our panic. The doctors worked quickly, performing ultrasounds and running tests. The wait was excruciating, each minute stretching into an eternity. My parents arrived, their faces ashen, their silent prayers palpable. Then the doctor emerged, her face grave. My heart plummeted before she even spoke. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice soft with professional empathy. "Sarah has suffered a placental interruption. There's nothing more we can do. She's lost the baby." The words hit me like a physical blow. The world seemed to tilt. Sarah's heartbroken sob tore through the sterile silence of the hospital corridor, a raw, primal sound of unimaginable grief. David knelt beside her, clutching her hand, his own tears streaming down his face. My mother let out a strangled cry, burying her face in my father's shoulder. Our light, our beacon of joy, had been extinguished. The empty crib, once a symbol of hope, was now a monument to a devastating loss. The creature had taken what it wanted. It had reaped its harvest. In the days that followed, a crushing despair settled over our family. Sarah was a shell of her former self. The vibrant artist, the cheerful sister, was gone, replaced by a hollow-eyed woman who rarely spoke, consumed by grief and a chilling, nascent anger. She had lost her baby, not to medical complications alone, but to a malevolent entity, a truth that no one outside our immediate family could comprehend. David was shattered, but he tried to be strong for Sarah, though his own pain was evident in his haunted gaze. My parents nursed Sarah, their quiet strength a lifeline in the darkness. As for me, my grief was quickly overtaken by a burning need for answers and vengeance. The incident at the antique shop, the crone's words about black magic, and a life for a life surged to the forefront of my mind. Who would do this? Why Sarah? And what debt was she supposedly paying?
The rational part of me was screaming for a scientific explanation, but the sheer undeniable horror of what we had witnessed, what Sarah had endured, drowned it out. As Sarah lay recovering, physically and emotionally shattered, a new, terrifying emotion began to fester. It wasn't just sorrow. It was a profound, icy anger. One afternoon, I found her staring out the window, her face pale and drawn. "Eddie," she said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion, "I want to know who did this. I want to know why. And when I find them, I'm going to make them pay." Her words sent a shiver down my spine. It wasn't just the grief talking. It was a cold, calculated resolve. In that moment, I realized Sarah wasn't just a victim anymore. She was hardening, and a dangerous fire was beginning to burn in her eyes. The entity had taken her child, and in doing so, it had awakened something dark and vengeful within her. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about retribution. And I knew, with the certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I would help her, no matter the cost. This devastating loss had opened a new, terrifying chapter, transforming Sarah's pain into a relentless pursuit of the truth and potentially a descent into a darkness of our own.
Part 5. The Salem Connection and the Unseen Hand. Sarah's quiet resolve for vengeance was both terrifying and understandable. Her grief had transformed into a cold, sharp blade, honed by unimaginable loss. David, while heartbroken, seemed to shrink under the weight of her new intensity. He just wanted his wife back, the vibrant Sarah who had filled their lives with laughter. My parents, though equally devastated by the loss of their grandchild, tried to guide Sarah towards healing, towards acceptance. But Sarah wasn't interested in acceptance. She was interested in justice. "We need to find that old woman," Sarah declared one morning, her voice flat, devoid of emotion, yet firm. "The one from the antique shop. She knew something." It was a lead, however slim. I agreed. The crone had spoken of black magic, of a debt, of a payment. She was the only person who had offered anything beyond sympathy and medical platitudes. The antique shop was exactly as Sarah described, dusty, cramped, filled with an eclectic mix of forgotten treasures and obscure curios. We found it on a quiet side street, its windows grimy, its open sign barely visible. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of old wood, incense, and something indefinable, something ancient. We found the old woman sitting behind a cluttered counter, poring over a faded leather-bound book. Her sharp eyes, the same ones Sarah had described, looked up as we entered. They seemed to pierce through us, not seeing just our physical forms, but the raw anguish and burning questions we carried. "You have returned," she rasped, her voice like sandpaper. She looked directly at Sarah, a flicker of something that might have been pity in her dark gaze. "And you have lost what was meant to be lost. The payment has been taken." Sarah's face hardened. "Who did this? Why us? What payment are you talking about?" Her voice was low, trembling with suppressed fury. The crone sighed, a long, weary sound. She closed her book with a soft thud. "The magic, child, they run deep in this town, and some of them are stained with blood and sorrow. There are families here, old families, who have trafficked in shadows for generations. They deal in power, in influence, in vengeance, and they demand their due." She spoke of old pacts, of curses passed down through lineage, of dark rituals performed in the hidden corners of Salem, far from the tourist attractions. She spoke of a particular family, one she would only refer to as the Ironwoods, who had once been immensely powerful, renowned for their wealth and their clandestine dabblings in the occult. Their power had waned in recent generations, but their malice, she claimed, had only festered. "The Ironwoods," I repeated, the name unfamiliar to me. "What do they have to do with Sarah?" The crone looked at Sarah intently.
Is there anyone in your family, child, who had dealings with such people? Any ancestor who might have crossed them, or perhaps owed them something?" Sarah shook her head, bewildered. "Not that I know of. My family, the Greenwoods, we're just regular people. No history of anything like that." The old woman tutted. "History has long memories, child, and dark magic longer still. Perhaps not directly, perhaps a friend, a lover, a business associate, a slight, a betrayal, a forgotten debt. The black arts don't forgive or forget. They wait, and they claim their due when the time is ripe, often from the most vulnerable." She then pointed a gnarled finger at a small, aged wooden box on the shelf behind her. "The magic that took your child, it has a signature, a cold fire, a draining of warmth. It seeks to consume. It leaves a void. This is the mark of a specific kind of dark practice, one that feeds on potential, on life's nascent spark." "How do we fight it?" I asked, my voice tight. The crone looked at us, her expression grim. "You cannot fight a curse directly, not without understanding its root. You must unravel the threads, find the source of the debt. And that," she warned, "will lead you into very dangerous territory. These people, they do not like their secrets disturbed." She gave us another small, crudely carved wooden charm, similar to the first, but this one felt heavier, imbued with a faint warmth. "This offers a small protection, a veil against their immediate sight, but it is not a shield against their power." She refused to give us any more names, only hinting at old property records, forgotten legal battles, and lingering grudges in Salem's hidden archives. "Look to the past, the distant past. Look for connections to the Ironwoods. It is the only way." We left the shop with more questions and answers, but with a terrifying new direction. The name Ironwood echoed in my mind. Black magic, ancient families, forgotten debts. It was all so far removed from anything I had ever believed possible, yet it felt chillingly real. Back at the house, I started digging. My father, with his historical research skills, was an invaluable asset. We delved into local historical societies, online archives, and old property deeds. We started with Sarah's maternal lineage, the Greenwoods, going back generations. It was tedious, painstaking work, poring over faded documents and microfiches. Days turned into a week. Sarah, driven by a raw, unyielding determination, helped when she could, her eyes blazing with a fierce resolve. David, though still wary, offered what support he could, his concern for Sarah overriding his skepticism. Then my father found something. Buried deep within a property transfer record from the late 17th century, a name leapt out at us. Elias Greenwood, Sarah's distant ancestor. The record indicated a land dispute, a bitter legal battle over a significant piece of land near the town's original boundaries. The opposing party in the dispute? A family named Ironwood. My father's finger traced the old script. "Look at this, Eddie," he said, his voice hushed. Elias Greenwood won the dispute. The land, a considerable tract, was granted to him, but the Ironwoods, they lodged a formal protest claiming the verdict was unjustly influenced by dark arts and vowing eternal recompense. The phrase eternal recompense sent a shiver down my spine. It was a formal declaration of a curse. This wasn't just a land dispute. It was the seed of a generations-long vendetta. The debt the old woman spoke of was the land Elias Greenwood had stolen from the Ironwoods, and the payment they sought was Sarah's child. The revelation was a devastating blow, yet also a horrifying clarity. It meant the curse wasn't random. It was a targeted, ancient vendetta finally manifesting. The entity that had stalked Sarah, the malevolent presence that had stolen her baby, wasn't just a ghost.
It was the instrument of a centuries-old curse, a chilling, persistent shadow of the Ironwood family's unfulfilled vengeance. The unknown who now had a name, and with it, a tangible enemy to face. But how do you fight a curse that's been festering for over 300 years? The answer I knew would be far more dangerous than anything we could imagine.
Part 6. The Unseen Attacks and the Desperate Search. The revelation about Elias Greenwood and the Ironwoods was a gut punch. It solidified the terrifying reality of our situation. This wasn't some random haunting, but it targeted centuries-old vendetta. The entity that had taken Sarah's baby was merely an instrument, a manifestation of a deep-seated generational curse. The thought that such an ancient wrong could manifest with such devastating consequences was almost too much to bear. Sarah, however, reacted with a chilling sense of purpose. The grief was still there, a raw wound, but beneath it simmered a cold fury. "So they cursed us," she stated, her voice flat, devoid of its usual warmth, "for land, for dirt, and now they've taken my child for it. We need to find a way to break this, to end it." My father, ever the scholar, became consumed by the historical aspect. He delved deeper into the Ironwood family, tracing their lineage, trying to find any records of their occult practices beyond the single ominous protest note. He hoped to unearth some weakness, some way to unravel their dark magic. My mother, meanwhile, focused on Sarah, trying to coax her back to some semblance of life, though Sarah remained largely withdrawn, her gaze distant, fixed on some unseen horizon. The house, however, did not quiet down. If anything, the entity's presence seemed to swell, a constant, oppressive weight. It was as if, having achieved its goal, it was now flexing its power, reveling in its victory. The cold spots were pervasive, no longer confined to the nursery. I would walk into the kitchen, and a wave of frigid air would wash over me, leaving goosebumps on my skin. Doors would slam shut with violent force. Picture frames would rattle, and the faint, mournful lullaby sometimes drifted from unseen corners of the house, a cruel reminder of what we had lost. But the most terrifying manifestations were now directly targeting Sarah. She started getting terrible, unexplained headaches, sharp, piercing pains behind her eyes that would leave her nauseous and disoriented. Sometimes she'd collapse, clutching her head, crying out as if invisible needles were being driven into her skull. We rushed her to the emergency room twice during this period, but the doctors could find no medical explanation for the severe pain. It was as if the curse, having accomplished its main goal, was now slowly, maliciously draining her energy, her will to live. One evening, I witnessed it myself. Sarah was sitting on the couch, lost in thought, when suddenly she gasped, her body arching backward as if struck. Her eyes rolled back in her head, and a thin stream of blood trickled from her nose. It was terrifying. I rushed to her, David already at her side. As we tried to help her, I felt a distinct, freezing pressure on my hand, as if a large, icy palm had gripped mine for a split second, then vanished. Sarah shuddered, then slowly came to, her eyes fluttering open, filled with a deep exhaustion. "It feels like something is pushing into my mind, Eddie," she whispered, her voice weak, trying to twist something, pull something out. The old crone's words echoed in my mind. A draining of warmth. It seeks to consume. It was clear the entity wasn't done with Sarah. It was systematically attacking her, trying to break her, to perhaps consume her entirely. This wasn't just vengeance. It was psychological torture. We desperately needed help. Beyond historical research, I revisited the antique shop alone, hoping the old woman could offer more concrete advice. She listened to my frantic retelling of Sarah's worsening condition, her expression unreadable. "The payment is taken, yes, but the hunger remains. When a dark art is successful, the channel it opened often remains. And if the target holds strong will or a deep desire for vengeance, that channel can fester, becoming a new source of torment. It seeks to consume the remaining light." How do we close the channel? How do we stop it? I pleaded. She hesitated, then spoke slowly, choosing her words carefully. Such ancient curses are woven with intricate threads. To sever them, one must often confront the weaver, or at least their legacy. You have found the name, the Ironwoods, but merely knowing the name is not enough. You must understand their magic, their power, and you must find something stronger. Stronger than what? Stronger than their shadow, a counterspell, a banishment. But these are not found in books, not easily. They are often held by those who walk between worlds, those who understand the true nature of such darkness. She refused to name anyone specific, warning me against seeking out charlatans. Look for genuine practitioners, not tricksters, those who live by the old ways, who understand the balance. They are rare, and they are discreet. They will not advertise themselves. This was a frustratingly vague lead, but it was all we had. I started searching for spiritual advisors, paranormal investigators, occult experts, anything that sounded even remotely legitimate. It was a minefield of scams and sensationalism. Most leads led to dead ends or people more interested in exploiting our desperation. Meanwhile, Sarah's condition continued to deteriorate. She became gaunt, her skin almost translucent, the headaches were almost constant, and she started experiencing moments of disassociation, staring blankly in the space as if her mind was elsewhere. Her vibrant artistic spirit, once so full of life, was slowly being extinguished. One evening, as I was scouring the internet, frustrated and feeling helpless, my father called me. "Eddie," he said, his voice unusually excited, "I think I found something significant about the Ironwoods. Not just their curse, but their weakness." My heart leapt. A weakness. It felt like a small mystery was finally about to be resolved, a piece of the terrifying puzzle finally falling into place. This information I instinctively knew would change everything, giving us a tangible target and perhaps a path forward in this desperate, terrifying fight.
Part 7. The Ironwood's Weakness and the Psychic's Plea. My father's discovery about the Ironwood's weakness was a lifeline, a desperate surge of hope in the suffocating darkness that had enveloped our lives. He looked at me, his eyes gleaming with a mix of academic triumph and profound urgency. "It's not a weakness in their magic itself," he explained, gesturing towards a stack of old books and digitized archives on his laptop. "More of a binding condition. The Ironwood family, particularly the branch that established this curse, were deeply rooted in the concept of ancestral land. Their power, their influence, their very being was tied to the land they claimed as theirs. The land Elias Greenwood acquired, it wasn't just valuable, it was considered the spiritual heart of their ancestral holdings." Then he showed me an old, brittle map he'd found in the town's Historical Society archives, a hand-drawn survey from the late 1600s. It clearly marked the disputed property. They believed that if that specific piece of land ever completely left their control, or if its ownership was fundamentally rejected by all living Ironwood descendants, it would weaken their ancestral power, potentially even nullify long-standing curses. It was a secret, a failsafe in case their power was ever truly challenged from within. "So the land is the key?" I asked, my mind racing. "Precisely," he confirmed, "but it's not as simple as buying it back. The protest notes, the legal records from that era, they repeatedly emphasize spiritual ownership and unbroken lineage. The curse wasn't just about reclaiming the land, it was about the usurpation of their spiritual birthright. To truly break it, the land would need to be either returned to a direct Ironwood descendant who actively rejects the curse, or it needs to be made irrevocably unclaimable by any Ironwood, severing their spiritual ties to it entirely. The latter is obviously more complicated,
legally, and perhaps magically. The former option was almost laughable. Find a benevolent Ironwood who would disavow their family's dark legacy in Salem? Unlikely. The latter, however, offered a terrifying but yet tangible possibility. The next few days were a blur of legal research. David, despite his ongoing struggle with Sarah's condition, threw himself into helping me, contacting real estate lawyers and poring over property records. The land, surprisingly, was still undeveloped, a small wooded parcel on the outskirts of modern-day Salem. It had passed through several owners over the centuries, often quietly, sometimes through foreclosures or tax sales, never truly thriving. It was as if the land itself was cursed. While I was occupied with the legalities, a new, desperate plea emerged from Sarah. Her headaches were escalating, and she was experiencing terrifying waking visions. She started speaking of a black veil closing in, of a cold hand reaching into her very thoughts. Her doctor, Dr. Aris, was at a loss. Sarah was physically deteriorating, her blood pressure alarmingly low, her immune system compromised by the constant stress. One afternoon, my mother, Eleanor, returned from a solitary walk around town, her face unusually pale. "I found someone," she announced, her voice hushed. She's different, not like the others." My mother, a woman of deep, quiet faith, had always possessed a keen intuition. She had felt drawn to a small, unassuming bookstore with a faded esoteric study sign in its window. Inside, she found a woman named Elara Vance. Elara was in her 40s, with kind but intensely perceptive eyes and an aura of quiet strength. She ran the bookstore, but it was clear her true purpose lay beyond selling books. My mother, normally reserved with strangers, had felt compelled to speak to her. She cautiously hinted at our predicament, using vague terms about unexplained phenomena and a family curse. Elara listened patiently, her gaze never leaving my mother's face. "She knew, Eddie," my mother whispered, her voice filled with awe. "She knew about Sarah, about the baby. She said she felt a terrible resonance of ancient malice and deep grief radiating from our family. She didn't ask for money, didn't try to sell anything. She just said, 'Bring your daughter. The threads are too tangled for me to see clearly from afar, but I can try to help sever them.'" My father, skeptical of anything overtly mystical, was hesitant, but Sarah, weakened and desperate, made the decision for us. "Take me to her, Mom," she rasped, her eyes burning with a desperate hope. The next day, we brought Sarah to Elara Vance's bookstore. The air inside was calm, almost soothing, a stark contrast to the oppressive atmosphere of our house. Elara greeted us with a quiet empathy that immediately put us at ease. Her eyes fixed on Sarah, and a profound sadness washed over her face. "The bond was broken, child," she said, her voice soft but resonating with an unseen power. "But the tether remains, and the entity, having tasted life, seeks to consume the spirit that still burns so fiercely within you." She then began to explain the nature of the curse, echoing much of what the old crone and my father had discovered, but with a deeper, more spiritual understanding. This is not merely a ghost, but a familiar spirit bound by a blood pact, a centuries-old directive to reclaim what was lost. It feeds on suffering, on despair, and your desire for vengeance, while understandable, is also fueling it, making the tether stronger. She then delivered a chilling diagnosis. "The entity is slowly siphoning your life force, Sarah. It wants to consume your essence, to extinguish your light. If this continues, your physical body will fail, and your spirit will be trapped, bound to its torment." My blood ran cold. This wasn't just about breaking a curse, it was about saving Sarah's life and her soul. Elara then revealed a small mystery, something that resolved a lingering question while opening up a terrifying new path. There is a way to break this tether, this ancient binding, she said, her voice firm, but it requires a powerful ritual, a ritual that must be performed on the very land that is the root of the curse. The Ironwoods bound their power to that soil, and it is there that their power and this curse must be unbound. She paused, her gaze intense. But it also requires a conduit, someone with a deep connection to the lineage, someone who can act as a bridge between the physical and spiritual realms. And that someone, she looked directly at Sarah, is you, Sarah. You are the nexus of this curse, and you must be the instrument of its undoing. But the risk is immense. It could break you, or it could free you. Are you willing to face the darkness at its source? Sarah, despite her weakness, looked at Elara, a flicker of her old fire returning to her eyes. "Yes," she whispered, her voice faint but resolute. "Whatever it takes, I will not let them win." The path forward was terrifyingly clear. We had a target, the land. We had a method, a ritual. And we had a conduit, Sarah. But the warning of immense risk hung heavy in the air, a chilling premonition of the final desperate battle that awaited us.